You're listening to the Nutrition Experts Podcast, featuring guests who take the scientific talk about food and break it down for practical use. You've heard the phrase, "you are what you eat." Come find out what that really means. Experience conversations with experts in the field of nutrition and understand the power of food for our health, well-being, and beyond. Now, here's your host, registered dietitian and nutritionist, Mathea Ford.
Hi there, it's Mathea. Welcome back to the Nutrition Experts Podcast. The podcast featuring nutrition experts who are leading the way using food starts today, right now, with our next guest. It's great to have Toby Amidor on the show today. Toby, welcome to Nutrition Experts.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm excited to have you on the show and share your expertise with my tribe. I know you have a lot of experience doing a lot of different things. So I'd like to let you start with telling my listeners a little more about you and what you do.
Sure. So I'm a registered dietitian with a master's degree in Clinical Nutrition and Dietetics from NYU, which I actually received while my mom got her master's degree in food and nutrition from NYU. We graduated together. Since then, I've taught at culinary schools in New York City. And eventually, I am now the nutrition expert for Food Network for the past 10 years. August will be 11 years. And I'm also a cookbook author. I have 4 cookbooks. I have 2 more coming out. One of them is a Wall Street Journal best-selling cookbook. That's my easy 5 ingredient cookbook. And then I do a lot of spokesperson work, and I write for about, 5 or 6 national publications. You might have seen me on US News or Shape or on Yahoo or something like that, because I would like to write a lot.
One of the things you specialize in is really helping people do meal prep and focus on that. So why do you think that meal prep is important?
I have 2 meal prep books, the Healthy Meal Prep Cookbook and Smart Meal Prep for Beginners. And the Healthy Meal Prep Cookbook it did phenomenally well. And the reason is a lot of people don't have enough time. Nobody has enough time these days. And so what it tries to do is helps you organize, shave off time during the week, but then allows you to eat healthy, well-balanced meals. And so I think a lot of people appreciate that. You don't have to cook up, go home 30 minutes every evening and make a meal. You can actually prepare it in advance, which is nice.
So in your books, you really talk about how to make healthier meals. You said you have a book called Smart Meal Prepping for Beginners, and that, I think, is your latest book, right?
That's the latest one. The first one was the Healthy Meal Prep Cookbook. And in the Healthy Meal Prep Cookbook, I didn't really take into account someone who has never meal prepped before. So after it came out, it's still doing phenomenally well. It's a bestseller, since it came out in 2017 on Amazon. But then we were like, my publisher and I were like, what about those people who are just getting started and need a little bit more of a 101? So then I did Smart Meal Prep, which is almost like a prequel. So you can actually use the recipes and combine the two, and you're good to go. But my Smart Meal Prep, what it does is, let's say you get really nervous, all those people on Instagram have like 9, 10 recipes, and it's overwhelming. And that's something you don't want to do. Get overwhelmed, because then you won't do it. So in Smart Meal Prep, what I have is I have 5 or 6 meal plans, but I start with like 3 recipes. That's it. So you can have a breakfast, and then I have like 2 lunches that you can rotate between. And that's your 3. And if you want to continue to do it at 3, that's great. If you want to continue to evolve and do more because you really want to do like breakfast and lunches or lunches and dinners, however you want, you can build on it to make it individual so you are comfortable with it.
So why did you call it Smart Meal Prepping? Kind of what is Smart Meal Prep?
Well, with Smart Meal Prep, I really have 5 steps to help you meal prep. So I really take that 101 and give you all the steps. So the first thing is to choose when to prep. And I think it's a misconception. People think that you have to do everything in one day. And sometimes that just doesn't work. Like my kids on Sunday, they have activities and a lot of driving. I don't know if you have kids too. I don't know if you're driving them and, stuff is out Sunday. Sometimes it's not possible to do all that prep. And so you can switch it into 2 days a week if that helps you too. You could do 2 or 3 dishes one day and 2 or 3 dishes the other and kind of break it up. But just choosing when is step 1. And then deciding what you're going to prep. I focus on healthy, so everything I have is in the healthy, arena. and, looking online and finding and printing and then knowing what you're going to prep. That's step 2. And then step 3 is going food shopping, which you do have to plan for. One of the biggest things I like about food prep is that it helps also minimize food waste. How many times do you go shopping and then you go and you're like, oh, I just bought something I have already. I'm never going to finish both. It's going to go bad. So when I make my shopping list, I don't know about you. Do you I sit down with the 3 or 4 recipes or whatever I'm doing. I actually send one of my kids, do I have this? Do I have that? Do I have this? Go bring it out, put it on, the counter. I take all my dry goods on the counter and I write down so I'm not overbuying.
Yeah, we do that. My husband, I'll say, this is what we need. And he'll go through and open the cabinets and say, this is what we have. We have that. We have that. And we'll mark it off.
Exactly. So I literally go one ingredient by one ingredient so I don't forget anything. And then after your food shopping, it's time to prep and cook. So you have to set time to do that. And I'm always slow cooker is one of my favorite tools because you could put it as the first thing to do and it takes a while to cook while I do my other 2 dishes. If I want to do 3 dishes total, let's say. And the last step, which I think people forget, and it really makes a difference when you're trying to eat healthy, is to portion and pack. So a lot of times when you hear healthy eating and nutrition, it's all about portion control. And this is where you have it, the most control. So you don't want to leave a big dish. You actually want to portion it out into those individual dishes. So you can either take it to work or you can pull it out of the fridge when you need it for your meal.
So I guess I was thinking of meal prepping as food that you're packing basically for your lunches for the week, but you made it a little more than that, right?
I do it so if you want to do a double batch of, let's say, meatballs and then freeze it for later, because sometimes you don't have time over a weekend. So you can actually, again, you plan it however works for you. But if you have time and you're like, I'm going to do a double batch of this and then I'm going to save it in the freezer in individual containers, and then you can defrost it a month, 2 months later, whenever you need it too. So that helps some people too.
A lot of my nieces use Pinterest a ton for recipes. They were actually I have an Instant Pot cookbook, and they're like, do you love your Instant Pot? I'm like, yeah, I use this cookbook. I do. And they're like, use a cookbook? Any tips on finding really healthy recipes on Pinterest? How to search for those? Or
Well, I have boards on Pinterest that I put my recipes or healthy recipes on. You just want to make sure whoever you're finding them from, first of all, is tasty, because that's a huge thing. Just because something is healthy doesn't mean it's not tasty. And there still are recipes out there that use just go low fat on it or use non-fat. And you're like, oh, you can't do that all the time and it's not going to taste as great. So you have to find those that really taste well. There's a lot of dietitian and healthy food bloggers out there with amazing recipes, but just definitely look through it and read through it before you decide to make it. Read the reviews on it if you can, and once you like it, this is what I do. Once I like it, I check mark it and I put it in a binder.
So you can find it later.
I'll do my hard copy. If you do it digitally and someone knows how to organize it digitally, you could do that as well. Do a digital, cook, recipe book cards on your computer, but whatever works for you. But I'm good with pen and paper. I'm a little old school.
Like I said, I have a bunch of cookbooks. So yeah. So thinking about meal prepping, and you mentioned your 5 steps, what are some of the things that people do wrong? So you mentioned how to do it right. What are some of the things where people do it wrong or get messed up when it comes to meal prep?
First of all, they don't leave enough time. They don't plan, and they want to do meal prep last minute, and that just doesn't work. You really need to plan to find the recipes. You need to plan to get your shopping list together, even if that takes 20 minutes to go in your pantry and check and write a list digitally or pen and paper. You need to find time to go to the supermarket. That takes at least an hour, because you remember you're shopping now for not just 1 or 2 recipes, but for many more. And then you need to leave yourself time to cook. And pack. So all these things take time. So although you may not be doing it every night of the week, and it does help shave off about 45 minutes during weeknights, you still have to plan for everything else. I think another mistake people do is they rush and they're like, okay, I got to do 9 dishes for that, gung ho and going full force ahead. But if that doesn't work for you and that's going to make you fail, you're not going to want to do it again. So you have to do things that are doable for you and that you like to do and that work for you. Another thing is freezing extras. You might have an extra few batches or few meals in there. Don't just throw it in the fridge for, who knows where it's going to go. It could go to waste. put it in the freezer, label it, so then you can eat it within 2 months. And then you have for a rainy, day that you didn't have time to meal prep. Those are just some of the things.
So, when you're thinking about planning your meals, you mentioned not enough time. I've found that the older my kids get, that the more input they want on meals. And that's a big thing in our family. Like, what do you want? You get to pick a meal this week or something like that, so that they're involved and they're more likely to eat it, because I wouldn't call them picky eaters, but they do like
their individual flavor, right? Yeah. The individual tastes and flavors. And I think that's really fun when you get the entire family involved. You can have, if you're doing 4 recipes and you have 4 people in the family, then everybody can pick a recipe. It could be mains or sides or whatever it may be. And they can even help in the kitchen. My soon to be 12-year-old, she's actually my recipe tester with me. So she comes, she knows at 12, she's like, what's the yield? What's the serving size? So she can actually help me formulate and edit my recipe. Oh, how much did it measure? She pulls out the right, measuring cup. She knows the measurements. And at this point, she can help me cook the meals. So yeah, it's just really getting involved, even coming to the supermarket. I have my older daughter, she's just turned 14, picking produce, because then you can teach them, this is the colors. And then one time she brought an onion home or a pepper home, and it had a blemish on it. And I didn't say anything, and I opened it up, and then you can see it was no good. It was blackened in the inside, and I wanted to show her, this is the blemish. When you open it, this is what you see. It was more of a learning moment. I was able to use half of it. And then she knew for next time, this is how we, select and what we're cautious for. So there's so many different learning moments when it comes to food, and kids of all ages. My youngest was 18 months. I'm wheeling her around, showing her the colors in the produce aisle. So
that's great.
And how to pick avocado, and just to press it with your fingers, and pears. Like, we do that together all the time.
Well, and that's life skills that people don't always think about. I noticed that when I taught dietetics at a local college, that some people had not experienced their parents cooking at home very much. They did a lot of out to eat meals and stuff. So they didn't have that base of how to go find foods in the grocery store, like you said, what is a good fruit, what is a good avocado, that type of thing. I love that you also mentioned the doing like 9 meals at once, because you see these epic blog posts and they're like, plan for the whole month, make 27 crockpot meals and fill up your freezer. And if you had a lot of help, maybe if there was, like, I know sometimes, like, me and my little sister talk about this, like, we should get together and make a bunch of these freezer meals together. Then you're doing like half the work and you share in the bounty, but doing it yourself, that's just almost overwhelming, especially initially.
And with so many meals, I advise then do some Instapot and some slow cooker recipes. Just those are it's like basically you dump things in, close, cook, and those are really easy to do.
Yeah, I love my Instant Pot. I just have been getting really into it. So I got that. And my kids seem to, like, they act like the slow cookers, like, not very good. So I'm like, fine, I'll do it in the Instant Pot. It's a similar idea. But so speaking of a little bit healthier meals, what are some things that you do to recipes, or that people can do to recipes, to make them healthier for meal prepping?
Well, I like to bulk up a lot of my meals with fruits and vegetables. So if I have a pasta dish, I will most certainly add, fresh tomatoes, even like shaved carrots. I just do anything to bulk it up. To add those fruits and vegetables, because we know that 90% of Americans just don't get the recommended amount of vegetables, and about 85% of Americans don't meet their fruit recommendations. And then one of the things I also realized with meal prep to make it healthier, a lot of these main meals don't have a lot of dairy in them or fruits. So those 2 foods sometimes can be missing from your main, and think about it, in your main meals, unless you're drinking a glass of milk or really putting a little cheese, you're really not getting dairy or fruit in there. So making sure those snacks, you can meal prep snacks, and I have those in my cookbooks, or just make sure you get like a yogurt and put some fruit on the side of that, or fresh fruit when you go. So plan for those missing food groups as your snacks, and that's something important to remember.
Yeah, I love yogurt. I especially love Greek yogurt. So I always try to get some at breakfast, because I'm just not a milk drinker, but I always try to get those other options, like you mentioned, with the cheese. Because those also help you to feel more full. So like you mentioned, like, you can have cardboard healthy food, or you can have tasty healthy food. And I think some of that is your spices and your flavors, and some of it is just being willing to try a variety of things and add those other in there. You mentioned the 5 steps. Those don't have to be all done in one day, right?
No. So if you're picking recipes, you could do it as you see them, in the evening, and you're picking them, and then you have to, by the end, you have to settle on X amount of recipes. And if you have to think about it, if you get fed at work for lunch, you don't have to go out. You don't have to make those. If, let's say dinner, you have a couple dinners that week for work, you're going out. Those don't need to be meal prep. So you have to work within your own constraints in your own life. You have to do what works for you.
So when you're thinking about making like 3 or 4 recipes for the week, about how long are you thinking that's going to take for a person?
3 or 4 recipes shouldn't take that long depending on what you're doing. I'd probably, like I said, I always like to start with like an Instant Pot or like a slow cooker so you can make, let's say, a chili. So that can be one. All you have to do takes 15 minutes and then you press the button. So then you're really worrying about your other 3 meals. So let's say you want a breakfast. Do you want to do like muffins? That's easy. That's 15 minutes to prep and 15 minutes to cook. You're done with that. Maybe a side of broccoli or cauliflower, steam it however you want. Make sure to divide it up. And then, I don't know, let's say you want a whole grain rice, let's say brown rice. So you have to think about how all these kind of come into play. And, when one thing is going, like the rice, let's say if it takes 40 minutes to cook brown rice, I can then go steam my broccoli. And so you're working in tandem. And once you start getting the hang of it with smaller amounts of items, then you can build slowly on it. So I would say like 4 recipes, about a half a day. You start going more, it's going to take you, like 3 or 4 hours. You take a little bit more, goes longer.
Well, and I love the idea, like you mentioned, with your kids that are a little bit older, but even at different ages, there are different things they can do. It is teaching them a life skill. So letting them peel the carrots, letting them cut something if they're old enough to handle a knife, or letting them, even just get out the bags and write on the bags what everything is, or the tubs, containers.
Or go through the cookbooks and actually flip through them if they're, some of them, they're on the computer all the time, so I don't mind. I'll pull out some of my cookbooks because I get a lot in the mail too. Or just going through mine. I said, what do you want? And they'll go through, oh, I remember this one. I want you, because they've taste tested, and I have between 100 to 150 recipes in every book. So they're like, oh, I remember the lime chicken for your 5 ingredient cookbook. I want to do that one. So, and of course, whatever they want, I'll try to incorporate. Another thing I do at Smart Meal Prep, I have meal plans developed. And what I try to do to minimize food waste is, let's say I'm making like an egg muffin for breakfast with broccoli in it. I try to have that broccoli used for another meal for that week. So maybe it'll be like as a side, or maybe shredded into a pasta salad, whatever it may be. But I utilize the food. So you're not like, okay, I need 1 carrot. Now what do I do with the rest of the bag?
Yeah, I think that's important, because not only are you making healthier food, but you're also saving money. If you plan on buying groceries and you put the food together, you're not buying lunch, you're not getting Postmates, you're not going through the drive-through. So yes, it's healthier, but it's also a cost savings, don't you think?
Yes, I absolutely think. And I'll go to those big, warehouse stores, and I'll get the hamburgers. And I know, like, I usually have a 1.25 pounds of hamburger meat that serves 4. If I need more, I'll add on. That's like one of my recipes. And then I'll separate them out. So if I want to make 2 portions, I take 2 bags. So once I get home, I'll separate out the meat into portions. And then I know exactly how much I need per person. And so that's why all of my cookbooks also have a Toby's tip on the bottom, which is an actionable tip. If you want to swap something, you want to add something, you want more vegetables, you want a different grain. So you don't know how to store the herbs. Like, I always put some sort of actionable tip to like, I could do that. So it's kind of fun to read through my recipes in that sense too.
What tips do you have for people just getting started doing meal prep? So like you mentioned, your whole Smart Meal Prep is really for beginners. What are some tips that you have for people starting with meal prep?
Start with just a few recipes. Like, for example, the first meal plan that I have in the Smart Meal Prep book has 3 recipes. I have a smoked salmon breakfast bowl, which is basically you have smoked salmon, you have hard-boiled eggs, some vegetables and cheese, and like some lemon. I have a deconstruction chicken burritos, and then I have a beef and mushroom stir fry with brown rice and lentils. That's it. And if you want to swap anything, you're allergic to something, you don't like, smoked salmon for breakfast, you can go, I have recipes and you can swap it in so you can have 3. Once you've done that and you feel comfortable with the process, then start adding a fourth, start adding 2 different breakfasts that you can rotate between. And I think that's really important. Another thing that's really important is to remember to divvy everything up. Like, do not forget that step, because if you forget to divide and have all the ingredients there, you're still going to take time to assemble it, and you're not going to have time during a very busy work week to do that.
So what about people who maybe want the same food every day versus people who maybe want to have something a little different? So for me, for example, if I made chili, I'd eat it for 3 or 4 days. But maybe there's people that really are like, I can't stand chili 2 days in a row type thing. How do you handle that?
So the Smart Meal Prep was designed for people, because that's the feedback we were getting, is that people wanted to eat the same thing every day. But then I've started hearing other feedback. No, we don't like that. It's like almost like, do you know, like on your plate, people like food touching and people like food not touching?
Yes.
I don't like my food touching, though I'll let it if like it's beans and rice. I like how they taste together.
My daughter, this weekend we had quesadillas for dinner, and she put ketchup on her plate, and she went back to get a second quesadilla, and I put it on her plate, and she said, "Oh, it touched the ketchup." I'm like, well, aren't you going to put ketchup on it anyway? But so how do you handle those different things?
So what I try to do is I try to repurpose it. So let's say I have a white bean chili on my healthy meal prep cookbook. And that white bean chili, I actually repurposed it to make, you can put the chili in the quesadillas with a little bit of cheese in it. And so I repurposed it that way. I also have a barbecue chicken in the slow cooker, which is really nice and soft. So what I do over there is I can make a pizza with barbecue chicken. My kids love that. And so we would do whole grain, pizza crust that you can buy. You could put a tomato sauce or make your own tomato sauce, or, and then you have your chicken on there. And so you're repurposing it. You can make them into tacos. You can make a baked potato and put the barbecue chicken on it. So you're still utilizing, because meat's expensive, you're still utilizing that dish, but you're just serving it in a variety of ways.
It's just one of those things that you just don't always think of, but it makes a lot of sense to do it that way.
And you always have like extra quesadillas usually laying around, or an extra potato, or sweet potato. So it's like stuff you have in your house.
Well, and I like the idea you mentioned earlier of putting things into the freezer instead of keeping them in the fridge. So for me, if I make, like I said, a bowl of chili, I'm going to keep it for 3 or 4 days. If I make a large bowl of chili for the family, and then I'm the only one eating it for 3 or 4 days after that, then I do take part of that and freeze it in containers and put it in the freezer so that I can use it in a week or so and it not go bad.
Right. And you can actually put it, the only thing I would do is label it, but you can actually eat it up to 2 months later. As long as you put it, and you could do it in individual, or you could do it in a family style, and then you reheat it right on stovetop. If you don't want to use microwave, you could do it that way too. But yeah, it's just using your freezer, not overfilling it with some other junky foods, that people have, because I've had that complaint too, that people have very, very little freezer space. So if you want to meal prep with very little freezer space, your best bet is probably meal prepping twice a week. So you can eat it, do half a week. So again, this is what I mean by individual. How much space you have, if you have how many people in your household. If you do have a lot of freezer space, are you going to eat it later on, as opposed to some people will toss it, which you obviously don't want to do. So you have to know yourself too.
All right. So thinking about what we talked about with the meal prep, how can this information be used by the listeners in their day-to-day life? And a lot of the listeners are dietitians. And then I know I get a lot of feedback from people that are just looking for nutrition information, healthy nutrition. So how can dietitians use this in their day-to-day work when they work with clients?
Well, what I try to do when you're building for meal prep, for healthy meal prep, you do want to keep in mind all the food groups. You want to talk, whole grain, fruits, vegetables, lean protein, low and non-fat dairy, and of course, healthy fats. And like I said, one of the things I was noticing just from a nutrition perspective is that fruit and dairy tend to be minimized in those main meals, especially lunches and dinners. So to make sure that the snacks or meal prepped complement whatever nutrients are not in that dish. So I have like a delicious poached pear and like a wine sauce that's in slow cooker, and the sauce is so good, and that would be a perfect, like that would stay basically all week as a snack or a dessert. Either way, it could be done. So I think that's something that's important to realize. And also the education component, in terms of portion control and the right size, how to measure everything out. All my meal prep cookbooks actually have measurements for each serving. So I don't say like divided by 4, a quarter of the recipe is a serving. I actually say 2 cups of this, a half a cup of this, 1 cup of this, and that's how you should build it.
And what about people who are just doing meal prep, done it for a long time? Is there any ways you have that maybe they can add some variety? Any ideas with that? If they kind of feel like they're stuck in a rut?
Yeah, if you're stuck in a rut, I have, so besides my 2 meal prep books, I have the easy 5 ingredient healthy cookbook, and that could be swapped in too for any of the meal prep. Meal prep recipes don't have to feed 16. They can feed 4, 6, 8. It doesn't, it really is how you use up that meal. And so any of those 5 ingredient recipes, which are so easy to make, you can find some really fun ones, fun recipes, fun varieties that you like, and kind of swap that in.
All right. So the question I ask everyone that comes on my podcast is, because we love talking about food, is what's your favorite food?
I know I have so many. I know I'm always like,
pick one.
I know I like my steaks, but then I also love my pizza, and then I love my ice cream. So
what's your favorite cut of steak?
Filet, the filet mignon. That's usually what I order out, because usually I can find them in a smaller portion as well.
Yeah, like 6 ounce usually.
I've even found them in 4 ounces and a steakhouse that was Toby portions. I was very happy.
Well, great. Toby, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. It was a pleasure to have you on the show. I know my listeners learned a lot about meal prep, and I loved a lot of your tips and ideas that you gave. So if listeners want to connect with you, what's the best way to do that?
They can go on my website. So it's Toby, Toby Amidor, Amidor Nutrition.com. There's a link to contact me, and there's also a link to my books and blog and articles and recipes. So there's a ton to poke around and, learn about over there.
What type of stuff do you write for Food Network?
I've been writing. I'm a founding contributor to their Healthy Eats blog. So I write about a lot of the latest trends. I wrote about the last article that's live right now. That's the top of the list over there, is how I always followed the Mediterranean diet, because my family is from the Mediterranean. We're from Israel. So I discussed that. Honestly, anything and everything nutrition I talk about over there.
Okay. Well, guys, this has been another great episode of the Nutrition Experts Podcast, the podcast that is all about learning more so you can do more with nutrition in your life.
You've just listened to an episode of the Nutrition Experts Podcast. Be sure to get more information about this week's episode at www.nutritionexpertspodcast.com. Tune in next time for another great conversation with a nutrition expert, and expand your personal knowledge in the field of nutrition, one conversation at a time.